The blood moon crown sat on a dais of black stone, and beneath it the great hall of Dravenmore was full. Torches lined the walls in iron sconces shaped like wolves in mid-howl, and their light caught on silk, on jewels, on the polished floor worn smooth by generations of court that had gathered here to watch a king choose. The whole pack had turned out for it. Elders in the front rows, minor nobles pressed shoulder to shoulder behind them, and servants along the walls, close enough to be useful and far enough to be forgotten. Noble daughters stood in a line along the marble, each one dressed for the Lunamark ceremony, each one waiting for Alpha King Kael Draven to look her way. This ceremony happened only once in a king's reign, and every family in the hall had spent years preparing a daughter, for the moment his gaze might finally land and hold. Lady Seraphine stood at the front of that line. She wore a white moon bracelet on her wrist, an heirloom the court called sacred, and she had been told since childhood that she was the shape a Luna was supposed to take, beautiful, unmarked, untouched by history. Evelyn Thorne was not in that line. She was a servant, and servants did not stand before a king during a mark ceremony. She carried a tray of wine along the edge of the hall, her head down, her left cheek turned slightly away from the light. A scar crossed that cheek in the shape of a broken moon, and the court had a name for it. Traitor Scar. She had worn that name longer than she had worn her own. She kept her eyes on the tray and her pace steady, because the fastest way through a room like this was to be forgotten in it. She was 3 steps past the dais when the mark on Kael's hand burned, not a flicker, but a brand, sudden and undeniable, spreading heat up through his wrist. Inside him, Riven, the wolf spirit bound to his crown, rose with a growl that only Kael could hear. Seraphine's bracelet did nothing. No light, no warmth, no recognition at all. The hall went silent in the specific way a room goes silent when everyone has seen the same impossible thing at once. Kael's eyes found the servant with the tray. Evelyn stopped walking. She did not turn her scar away this time. Seraphine recovered first. She lifted her chin and pointed. "That is the scarred one," she said. "The mark cannot mean her." A murmur ran through the noble line, and one of the older lords stepped forward before the king could speak. His name was Lord Varric, keeper of the court's histories, and his voice carried the practiced calm of a man repeating something he had said many times before. "Traitor marked blood," he said. The line that once tried to use the blood key to make a puppet of the throne. Every child in this hall was taught to fear that scar, my king, and rightly so. He turned to the assembled nobles as he spoke, drawing them into it, the way he always did when he wanted a fear to feel shared rather than declared. "Our histories are clear on this," he went on. "That bloodline sold Dravenmore's secrets to rival packs 3 generations past, and the crown itself was nearly broken for it. We do not honor that history by pretending it never happened. We honor it by remembering what a scar like that one is capable of." Heads nodded along the noble line. A few of the older lords murmured agreement, the kind of low assenting sound that made a lie feel like memory. Evelyn had heard this speech before, in different words, from different mouths, since she was a child too young to understand why the other servants stepped away from her. Kael looked at Evelyn. He looked at the scar Varric had just named a crime. Riven pushed against him, low and insistent, a pressure that had no words, only certainty. But Kael had grown up inside this court, and the court had spent his whole life teaching him what to be afraid of. He said, loud enough for every noble to hear, "The crown cannot take a mate marked by betrayal. It landed exactly as it was meant to, public, final, clean enough that no one in the hall would question it twice." Evelyn did not cry. She set the tray down on the nearest table, carefully, the way she had been trained to set down anything breakable. Then she looked at Kael and said, "Your mark recognized me. Your fear rejected me." She turned and walked out through the servants' corridor, and no one stopped her. Riven strained toward the doorway she had gone through, and then, halfway there, he flinched, as though he had struck something invisible in the air. Varric noticed. He said it was simply the old court wards. Security the crown renewed every year, to protect the royal line from outside influence. Kale heard the word renewed and did not think about it again. He did not remember, in that moment, that his own signature was on that renewal. In the servants' corridor, Talia found Evelyn sitting against the stone wall, her knees drawn up, her hand pressed to her scarred cheek. Talia was the only person in Dravenmore who had ever treated the scar like skin instead of a verdict. She began to hum the old lullaby she always hummed when Evelyn was hurting, the one her mother used to sing before the court took her mother away. Evelyn stopped her before she reached the second line. "Don't," she said. "It aches when you sing that one. It always has." Talia went quiet and simply sat beside her instead, and that was enough. Neither of them knew yet that the song Talia kept humming was not a lullaby at all. That night, the assassin came for the king. He came through the great hall itself, past guards who should have seen him and did not, and the blade in his hand was etched with the traitor's broken moon, the same symbol burned into Evelyn's face. It was meant to be found in Kale's body and read as her confession. Kale had stayed late in the hall after the ceremony, going over reports by lamplight, alone, except for the 2 guards posted at the main doors, guards who had no reason to expect trouble on a night like this one. The assassin came from the side passage instead, the one that ran behind the Blood Moon Crown, a route no outsider should have known existed, let alone been able to walk unchallenged. Evelyn was still in the servants' corridor when she heard the guards shout. She ran toward the sound instead of away from it, and what she saw first was not the assassin. It was the corridor ward light above the side door, dark when it should have been lit. She had walked past that light every day of her life in this palace. She knew its glow the way she knew her own hands. It had not failed on its own. It had been switched off by a council token, the kind only an elder of the court carried, pressed into a slot meant only for emergencies the crown itself declared. She understood, in the space of one breath, that this was not the work of a rival pack. It was the work of someone already inside these walls. She did not have time to say any of that. The assassin's blade was already coming down toward Kale's back, and Kale, mid-turn, was a half-second too slow to clear it. Evelyn threw herself between them, not for forgiveness. If the king died wearing a wound shaped like her own scar, Varric would have his coup wrapped in her name before sunrise. The blade caught her side instead of his. She fell against the wall behind the Blood Moon Crown, one hand pressed to the wound, and her blood ran down into a seam in the stone that no one in that hall had ever noticed before. The seam split. A door that had not existed a moment ago stood open behind the throne, dark and ancient, breathing cold air into the hall. The room did not belong to kings. It belonged to the bloodline that could stop them. Guards froze. Nobles backed away. Even the assassin, disarmed and pinned to the floor, stared at the opening the way a man stares at a grave he did not expect to see this soon. Kale gave the order before he even looked back at the door. "Seal the hall. No one enters or leaves until the guard captain has every name in the room accounted for." 2 guards dragged the assassin out for questioning while the rest formed a perimeter around the throne. He would not speak that night, not one word, but the physical evidence gathering around the attack would say enough without him. Kale stepped toward the door, one hand still raised from stopping the guards from closing on Evelyn. The threshold did not move for him. It simply refused him. The way stone refuses water it was never built to hold. He stopped at the edge of it and turned to Evelyn instead, kneeling by the wound in her side. He did not order Mara to be brought, he asked. "May Mara examine the wound before anyone touches the seal?" It was such a small thing, one question instead of one command. But it was the first thing he had done all night that Evelyn did not have to brace against. She let him call the healer. Mara arrived within minutes, and her hands were steady on the wound, and steadier still when she finally looked at the scar on Evelyn's cheek in the torchlight of that open door. "This was never a traitor's mark," Mara said quietly. "This is a seal. I have only ever read about its shape in old texts. I did not know it still existed on living skin." She could not say more than that. She was a healer, not a historian, and the deeper truth was not hers to give. The wound at Evelyn's side, she added, had missed anything vital. A clean line, already closed and bound. Painful, but not dangerous. And Evelyn would be steady enough to stand within the hour. It was waiting in the dark room behind the throne. Evelyn insisted on going in alone. She had spent her whole life learning that the moment she let someone else hold the truth about her, they used it against her. And 11 years in this palace had not taught her anything to unlearn that lesson with. She told Kale to stay outside. She told Mara the same. When Talia came looking for her hours later, Evelyn told her to wait by the door and go no further. Inside, the archive of the ancient Queen line stretched further than the hall above it. Shelves of records, untouched for longer than the Blood Moon crown itself had existed. Portraits lined one wall, women in old court dress, none of them wearing crowns, all of them wearing the same broken moon mark somewhere on their skin. A wrist, a collarbone, a cheek like hers. Evelyn read by torchlight until her eyes burned. She found genealogies tracing a line of women stretching back further than the Blood Moon crown's own founding record, each one noted not as royalty but as something the old text called keeper of the threshold, bound by blood and oath to stand apart from the throne and answer only to the law that made the throne possible in the first place. She found no mention anywhere of betrayal, no trial, no confession. Only, in a later hand, added centuries after the rest, a single addendum that read, "Line declared traitorous by council decree, records to be sealed." No reasoning followed it, no evidence. Only the decree itself, and a council seal she did not recognize, though something in its shape made her stomach turn cold. The truth was there, plain in ink older than the traitor history Varric had recited that morning. The ancient Queen line had not betrayed the crown. It had been created to check it. A bloodline given the right to open this room and halt the throne itself whenever a king or a council turned the crown into a weapon. The broken moon on the archive wall matched the scar on her own cheek exactly. She traced it with her fingers and did not call anyone in to see it with her. That silence had a cost, though she would not understand it until later. Because she kept the chamber sealed to everyone but herself, she never saw the ward maintenance log gathering dust 3 shelves over, the one bearing Kale's own signature beside the words annual renewal, traitor-marked bloodlines, excluded from primary rights. And outside, with no one watching the corridor, Varric had time to bring Seraphine close enough to the awakened threshold that the white moon bracelet on her wrist began, very faintly, to hum. It was Talia's voice, finally, that broke through. She had been waiting outside the door for hours, and when the silence stretched too long, she did the only thing she knew how to do for Evelyn. She sang. The same lullaby Evelyn had always told her to stop singing. Low through the stone, the melody Evelyn's own mother had once carried. Inside the archive, the wall symbols shivered at the sound. Evelyn went still, listening, and for the first time in her life, she heard the song as more than comfort. It was structured like an oath. It had the shape of a vow, verse after verse, and it was missing its final line. She went to the door and, for the first time since she'd walked in, opened it. "Talia," she said, "sing it again, all of it, from the start." Talia did, and when she reached the place where the song always seemed to end too soon, she hesitated, because there had never been more to it than that. "That's all I ever heard," she said. "My mother always stopped there." She said the last line was dangerous, and she never let it past her lips in front of me. Evelyn looked back at the archive wall, where the final line of engraved script had crumbled away centuries ago, leaving only the shape of missing words. Not lost, she realized. Cut out. Deliberately, a long time ago, by someone who did not want the song finished, and kept silent since by a mother who understood exactly what finishing it would cost. Kale was still outside when the ward maintenance log was finally found, not by Evelyn, but by Maera, sorting through fallen shelves near the entrance while she waited. She brought it to him without a word, and pointed to the signature at the bottom of the renewal decree. His own hand, from 3 years past. He read it twice, the words annual renewal and traitor-marked bloodlines, excluded from primary rights, sitting heavier each time. He had signed it believing it was old security tradition, a formality passed to him by advisors he trusted, and he had never once opened the original record it renewed. He understood, standing at the threshold of a door that would not open for him, that the wards keeping Riven from recognizing Evelyn, clearly for years, had not simply been Varric's doing. They had needed his signature to keep renewing every year, and every year he had given it without asking why. Mara found him still holding the page when Evelyn finally stepped back out of the archive. The blood key had not been made to rule a king, Mara said, reading from an older fragment she'd recovered nearby. It had been made to stop a crown from becoming a weapon. 3 functions the fragment recorded, no more. It could open the archive and the chamber of the ancient queen line. It could lock the crown's power when an oath was broken. It could confirm or void an oath that touched the throne directly. Nothing more than that. It did not command a king. It did not expose a conspiracy on its own. It was a break, not a leash. Cale showed Evelyn the ward log without being asked to. He did not try to soften what it said. "I signed this," he told her. "I did not check what it renewed. I led a court that taught me to fear you keep the wall between us, standing year after year, with my own hand." Evelyn took the page and read it herself, and said nothing for a long moment. It did not undo the rejection in the hall. But it was the first time anyone in this palace had handed her the truth, instead of making her dig it out alone. The peace of that moment did not last. There was no proof against Varric yet, not proof a king could act on. A council elder could not be arrested on the strength of a burning mark and a servant's suspicion, and Varric knew it. He spent those 2 days playing the part of a horrified statesman, offering guards, offering nothing that could be used against him, while the Forbidden Room's threshold sat quiet behind its guard detail, waiting for something with enough blood in it to wake fully. Seraphine came to the threshold of the Forbidden Room 2 days later, drawn there, she would later say, by a pull she didn't understand. The white moon bracelet on her wrist cracked down its center the instant she crossed close enough, and beneath the polished surface, older engraving showed through, half an oath cut into metal that did not match the bracelet's smooth outer face at all. Seraphine stared at it in horror. "This isn't mine," she said. "This was never mine." Varric was close behind her, and his expression did not carry the same shock. "It was taken from this very archive," he said, "and recut to serve a better purpose than sitting on a dead queen's wrist." Seraphine turned on him, and for the first time in her life, doubted the story she had been raised inside. She thought of every lesson she had been given since childhood: poise, purity, the careful shape of a girl built for display, and realized no one had ever told her the bracelet she wore as proof of that ideal had been pried loose from a dead woman's archive and recut to lie. She looked at Evelyn's scar differently for the first time, not as a mark of guilt, but as something that had simply never been allowed to be recut into a prettier shape. But doubt was not the same as defiance, not yet. When Varric told her the bracelet was the only thing standing between the crown and chaos, she did not hand it over. She held it against her chest and said nothing, torn between the girl she had been trained to be and the truth cracking open in her hand. Varric did not wait for her to decide. He stood at the threshold of the Forbidden Room and spoke the words of the fragment engraved into the bracelet, and the half-oath answered the awakened chamber the way a false key still turns partway in a lock. Inside Cale, Riven went down. Not a growl this time. A silence, sudden and total, as though something inside the king had simply stopped standing. Cale's knees buckled. The strength that had always lived under his skin drained out of him in a matter of seconds, and the bond that tied Crown to Wolf began, visibly, to dim. The hall filled with noise, guards shouting, nobles scattering, Mara dropping to Cale's side. Varric raised his voice above all of it. "Only her blood can close what her blood opened," he said, pointing at Evelyn. "Give it freely, girl, and save your king." Then, quieter, almost gently, as though he believed every word of it, he said the thing he had clearly been waiting years to say aloud. King without a key can become a tyrant, he told the hall. But a key in the council's hand can make every king kneel. I have only ever wanted balance. Is that so hard for this court to understand? It did not sound like a villain's confession. It sounded, to the nobles listening, like a man finally explaining a burden he had carried alone for their protection, and that was exactly the danger of it. Evelyn understood, in that instant, exactly what he was offering her. If she gave her blood the way Varric wanted, sealed by his ritual, spoken with his words, she would save Kael's life. She would also become a living key, forever bound to whichever hand in this court chose to use her next. She understood, too, why she had nearly walked into that trap without seeing it coming. She had kept the archive locked to everyone but herself for days, certain that solitude was the only safety she had ever been allowed. It had cost her the ward log. It had cost her the warning that would have kept Seraphine and that bracelet far from this door. Truth held alone was truth that could be stolen. The moment she blinked. She was not going to make that mistake twice. Kael, on his knees, fighting to hold on to consciousness, found the strength for one more sentence. No royal command will touch her blood, he said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. If I live, it will be because she chose it. Then quieter, meant only for her, though everyone heard it anyway. I rejected the woman my crown needed because I believed the fear my court taught me. Evelyn knelt beside him, not because he had asked her to, and not because the court demanded it. I am not doing this for the mark, she said. Not for this court, not for Seraphine, and not for Varric. I am doing this because if the crown can be locked by a lie, then every king after you is nothing but a puppet too. She pressed her palm to the wound at her side, and let her blood run toward the chamber floor. The pull of the false oath dragged at her immediately, trying to bind the blood into a permanent key, the beginning of the very chain Varric wanted. She felt herself weakening, the room narrowing, her own voice becoming harder to find. From the doorway, Talia began to sing again. Not from the start this time. She went straight for the place the song always broke off. The missing final verse that had crumbled from the archive wall centuries before anyone alive had been born. The same verse her mother had always called dangerous, and never once let past her lips. Talia had spent her whole life believing that verse was simply gone. It wasn't. It had only ever been withheld, out of love, by a woman who understood exactly what it would summon, and who had once, only once, sung it complete to a daughter she thought was asleep. Talia had carried it without knowing she carried it, until tonight forced it back to the surface. Talia sang it now, low and clear, into the chaos of the hall. No blood remains the key when witness law returns. The archive wall behind Evelyn lit along every crack of the broken moon symbol, matching the light spreading from her own scar. Evelyn understood in that instant that she was not rewriting anything. She was finishing something that had been cut short a long time ago, deliberately, by people who never wanted the crown checked again. She spoke the missing line back into the chamber herself, her hand still on the blood key, and redirected the oath as it was always meant to run. My blood is no longer a key for another hand to hold. The chamber answered with a sound like a held breath finally released. The pull toward becoming a living key snapped and did not return. In Kael, Riven rose again, slow at first, then steady, and the crown bond brightened back to its full color. Kael did not stand and claim the moment. He knelt instead, one knee to the stone floor, not before Evelyn as a maid accepted, but before the open chamber itself, the way a king kneels before something with the authority to command him. Varric tried to speak, tried to call the moment an unlawful seizure of council property, but the room had already begun to answer for itself. The blood key, true to its old and narrow purpose, did not expose the whole plot on its own. It confirmed and voided oaths, nothing more, and that alone was enough to end him. It found Varric's oath to the council, the one binding him to loyalty and honesty before the throne, and it voided it on the spot, the seal on his signature burning away from the parchment he carried in his coat. The rest of the proof came the way proof always had in this palace. Piece by piece, gathered by people, not conjured by magic. The council token used to darken. The corridor ward was found still in Varric's own chamber, its edges worn from repeated use. The assassin's blade was traced back to the council armory, a weapon that had never passed through any hand outside Varric's authority. The bracelet's cracked inner engraving matched, stroke for stroke, an oath fragment recorded as stolen from this very archive 2 decades earlier. And Kael's own renewal decree, laid beside the original record it was meant to renew, showed a clause quietly altered from its first draft, a clause Varric had added, not Kael. Seraphine stood at the edge of it all, the broken bracelet still in her hands, and made her choice at last. She walked forward and placed it on the table in front of Mayera. "Take it," she said. "Whatever I believed about her, I will not be the reason this happens again." It did not undo the harm she had caused, but it was the first thing she had done in this entire ordeal that was not shaped by someone else's design for her. By dawn, the emergency measures were already signed. Varric was taken into custody before the council could gather to defend him. The decree, barring traitor-marked bloodlines from primary rights, was suspended within the hour. The wards that had circled the falsely accused line for years were ordered dismantled, one gate at a time. The archive was sealed under royal guard, not to hide the truth this time, but to protect it. Seraphine's Luna candidacy was withdrawn, not as punishment alone, but as the honest end of a role built for her on someone else's lie. In the weeks that followed, the longer work began. Kael restored the ancient Queen line's name to the royal archive in full, and issued a public apology to every descendant the court's false history had ever harmed. He established what came to be called the Crown Oversight Law, granting the Luna or Queen line the standing right to check the crown itself through open testimony, not hidden mechanisms. He declared in writing that no bloodline in Dravenmore would ever again be turned into a living instrument for anyone's convenience. The law took months to draft properly, and Kael insisted on reading every clause aloud to the council himself before it was sealed, the way he had never once read the renewal decree that started all of this. Mayera was appointed to keep the restored archive, with instructions that its records were to be open to any descendant who wished to read them, not locked away for the court's convenience. Talia's mother's name was added to the record as well. Once Evelyn found it, 3 shelves deeper than she had looked the first time, listed simply as keeper of the missing verse, silenced by decree, restored by her daughter's voice. Talia cried when she read it. Evelyn did not tell her to stop. The court expected Evelyn to step forward and claim the Luna title the moment the mark bond was finally spoken of openly. She did not. "I will not become Luna simply because your mark finally found the courage to recognize me," she told him, in front of the same hall that had once called her scar a crime. "I will only stand beside this throne once my bloodline is no longer spoken of as guilt." Kael did not argue the point. He told her she was free to leave Dravenmore once the investigation closed, if that was what she wanted. He did not touch her scar. He did not speak of the mate bond as a claim already settled. He only brought her the first page of the restored archive record, the one bearing her family's name in ink that had finally been corrected, and set it in her hands. Evelyn chose to stay, not as a mate recognized at last, not as a prize the crown had finally been allowed to keep, but as a guardian the crown could not command. She stood beside the blood moon crown with her scar uncovered, and behind her, the door to the forbidden room closed quietly. No longer a secret the council kept, only a reminder, standing watch over the throne. For the first time in the long history of Dravenmore, the throne had a guardian it could not order into silence.